Hello, and welcome to today's Bright Talk webcast on the topic of marketing attribution, how to uncover the truth, and hopefully Joe and myself will guide you through today's session and help you figure out the difficult but really important topic of attribution when you're doing all of your outbound digital and physical marketing for your organization. So a little bit about myself. I'm Deirdre Mahon. I am an advisor at Expert Marketing Advisors. I'll share a little bit about who EMA is. We say EMA for short because it's a little bit of a mouthful, but it's the name describes exactly what we do. And I'm sitting here next to my colleague and partner in crime, Joe McDougald. Introduce yourself, Joe, and a little bit about you and your background.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joe McDougald. I'm a partner at Expert Marketing Advisors, and about a year ago, I think our other colleagues and I started the firm, and what sort of was the impetus behind that was we had long time been just experts over and over and over again at Silicon Valley startups, and several of them have actually gone, on to bigger and better things. But what we found was that there was a need in the Valley for expertise around how to do startup marketing, and really from that initial ground level and getting those first programs set up, getting the tech stack established, and that's sort of our expertise, as well as doing virtual summits.
One of the many things we do and for our clients and now for ourselves today. And the picture that you're looking at on the screen is actually a core group of 7 of us. We did an off-site, think of it as our own sales kickoff. And you'll see the second from the right person is pregnant in the picture, and she has now had her baby. So congrats to you. Shout out to Rachel. So let's dive into just a little bit of background, and this will be good context for sharing some of our best practices when it comes to attribution today. So we are actually worldwide team, and there's 20 plus experts on our roster that our customers tap on a frequent basis. We have a ton of experience in both the tech stack implementation. We also have creative team members, and our sweet spot and where we really help clients, especially in the sort of B stage or growth phase of their organization, is how do you generate demand for the business. So we work side by side, hand in hand with our customers, not only figuring out the go-to-market strategy, but all of the tactical program delivery so that they can meet and hopefully, in most cases, exceed their goals. This is the team here. So I'm the second from the left on the top there, and Joe's bottom left, far left, the blonde. So the team is made up of, we have advisors that generally get involved in all the go-to-market strategy and messaging and defining what the programs and campaigns are. Every client has a customer success manager who oversees and is that referee as we go and tactically execute to meet those goals. And then we have experts. So depending if you need SEO or SEM or field marketing and so on. We actually have that. We call it we are your army of marketing experts to help augment what your organization is doing. Really salient points here, because what our team is really good at is we know Salesforce, we are certified. We also have certifications on Marketo and HubSpot, which are critical for all things attribution, and ABM, which is becoming much more popular, especially in the B2B space. Organizations that we work closely with, like Demandbase, and then you'll just see on the bottom there all the other things that we help our clients get off the ground and execute so that they can be successful in all their figuring out their customer journey and their repeatable sales processes. We have an extended army of partners worldwide. In fact, we have partners that are in Australia, so for some of our global clients, that's really important. So we're around the clock. We're extremely responsive. We actually have a partnership with Bright Talk, We worked with our clients directly on this platform. We think it's wonderful. It's really important at the early stages of building out your funnel and your sales force, and then everything from field event management, design, working on explainer videos, and all of the contents and tools and operations requirements that you need as a startup. So let's get into the meat of it. So attribution, I think it would be good to start with, some definitions. So attribution for me is sort of like, think of the breadcrumbing of what are all those touch points and what are the engagement points and things that help convert a buyer as they take their journey to hopefully becoming a successful customer and that closed deal. And I think it's always good to start with the definition. There's a lot of information in the market on what is attribution and, what are all the different models, how do I get started, what are the best practices, how long does it take to get an attribution engine off the ground, and who else should be involved in my organization. So these are some of the topics that we're going to go into in a bit more detail today. And, of course, once you have, all this data and wisdom that you've learned over the period of time, then what? So we'll close out with sharing some of our best practice approaches. So attribution, for you, Joe, you work with clients on a consistent basis and figuring this out. What does attribution mean to you or your clients? Let's just focus in on some definitions here.
Well, in terms of the types of attribution, there's multi-touch and, of course, first touch, and then just the full path. And here, having our partnerships with and expertise in Marketo and HubSpot are critical in our practice in terms of really making sure that we're tracking that data and making sure that it's actionable along the way. And our hand-in-hand teammates with sales is really what's important to this whole conversation. And so as we walk towards the rest of this presentation, we're going to come back to that as a recurring theme, and I think we'll head there next.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think I might have I hit my button twice there, so I'm going to go back. It's a little delayed. So the funnel. So let's before we dive into the models, as Joe said, there's different models that you can apply, and those models would be based on what are actually you trying to achieve, what are some of the answers, and what are your overall business goals. So, our go-to-market team's classic funnel here. So just to remind you, this is B2B enterprise selling. Now, of course, it could be a SaaS offering, or it could be, an offering where it's a low-touch SaaS, or where you're predominantly selling from an inside team and working in concert with those marketing teams. But also it could be a high-touch, more complex sell, 9, 12-month sales cycle. I call it the whale hunting. And we've worked with organizations that have both types of models and both strategies. So, classic funnel. Now, historically, marketing would be living in the orange area of this, at the top of the funnel, where you're sort of, figuring out the ICP, figuring out who is it that you need to have conversations with. Who are you filling your sales force, assuming you have that CRM instance? Who are you filling that database with in terms of who you're talking to? And engaging with them through a variety of different outbound campaigns and digital efforts. And then the sort of purple area is really where your inside team and your inside biz dev are working in concert, or your inside salespeople working in concert with an outside sales rep who are probably in the blue area. But a couple of points we just want to make, and we're not diving into the innards of our funnel today, but more and more marketing is not staying in only the orange area. They have to have visibility all the way through the funnel, and especially when it comes to attribution. You want to know exactly what's happening, with those customers after they've sort of left the orange area and they're working tightly with those sales teams and pre-sales and customer success teams. You want to have visibility all the way down. And the best way to do that is to think of marketing and sales as one unified go-to-market team. And I would argue that customer success, especially for long-term retention of your clients and reducing churn, it's important to have those stakeholders involved as well, and even at the outset. And Joe wants to just add a couple of points here on this funnel and having the visibility all the way through.
Yeah, and I think, in terms of our practice, this is a conversation that you don't have just once. You have this early and often with your clients because you really need to define, and as a marketing organization, you can call sales your clients.
Yeah.
You're delivering leads to them. You're delivering MQLs. And what the handshake typically has been that when they take that sales accepted lead, then they know that they're going to be able to work that with confidence. But we need to know what were the steps that got them to that sales accepted lead and what surfaced that lead and what were the early, both on digital and in real life campaigns that we ran that surfaced that lead, which is sort of what we're getting to here. But just recognizing the funnel, because this is really the backbone of your organization. For SaaS deals, we can also turn this into a bow tie, just turn that sideways. And then the next part of the funnel begins as we expand and continue to nurture that customer and continue to communicate with them. Marketing communication doesn't just stop when the deal has closed. Then the next phase begins as we nurture that ongoing customer to the next phase.
Yeah, a couple of other points. Sometimes we work with clients who believe they have their buying cycle and their steps in their sales funnel figured out. And, until you start executing and doing, outbound and giving yourself enough time to gather enough data points to make some informed decisions about what to do next and how to improve, the patience level often I find wears thin. So a lot of times organizations say, well, we've been doing this for a quarter, so why haven't we got more opportunities in our pipeline? What's going on? Is it not working? And you start to second guess your message, or you start to second guess, do you have your differentiators clear enough, or do we have the right buyer personas and so on? So just on the left side of the screen there, I thought it was worth just reminding people that, especially when it comes to B2B, it takes 7 to 10 touches. And let's face it, most startup organizations are doing something super innovative, brand new, knocking down some legacy old way of doing things. So they have to educate their buyer, and you can only do that in a multi-touch approach. The other thing is that usually it takes 5 to 7 people in any sizable enterprise to get them involved and engaged in concert together, such that when they start to make that decision and they're doing their proof of negotiation, they're all on the same page. They've all received that same value message from you, the provider. And then you think about it, how many weeks a quarter, right? We're talking about in a 3-month, sales cycle. How would you possibly get 7 to 10 touches out? You don't want to annoy them and bombard them every other day. You've got to give them time to digest and make it a conversation, right? The conversation can't be repetitive. It can't be annoying. It has to be informative. So I would just encourage you to think about that more and give yourself some time. Okay, I will press my forward button only once. So this is actually a little bit of an eye chart, but I think there's some important points here. Sometimes when you're starting out, you don't quite know what does a buyer's journey look like. You have to start somewhere. So your buyer's journey, like classic standardized B2B selling, there's an awareness, consideration, purchase, retention, and then of course the ongoing expansion or renewal from your existing customers. So Joe, share a little bit about what you worked with your clients on and how that has helped figure out your attribution engine and how you get things started. So
I'm just going to take 1 second. I heard from the audience that the audio is off. Can I get a proof of life out there? Can we have people just tell us that you can hear us? I think if you just say hello. Where are we? I don't know if our speaker's on, but we'll press on. It's only heard from one person. Maybe they just had a singular problem. Okay. Yeah. So in the buyer's journey, obviously, as little companies are getting out of the box, we're just searching for making sure that your messaging is spot on and that you are repeating this process throughout the buyer's journey and creating content that is both inspiring and actionable. And so really what you're looking for is never putting out content for content's sake, but rather you're putting out content that will inform, engage, inspire, and really help move the conversation along. You know, where the days are gone where you can just, you know, find one way to get to engage with multiple end users and multiple roles within a company. So especially for our enterprise sales, there are influencers, the buyer, and then the champion and the end users, all of whom need different messages about engaging with your product, and sussing out that is a critical part of our messaging practice, because it's important that we help tease out of our product people and out of the sales people the conversations that they're having, and then making sure that we're documenting that and then helping create the assets that inspire. And so the assets that we are typical for any of these haven't changed much over the years, but they're important to note. So as you're building out your corpus of assets to create, that you make sure that you're helping guide, you know, the product marketing team and understanding that sales will have these assets available to them, mapped against each persona, mapped against the problem set that you're trying to solve for, and then inspires change. What we're often dealing with, as Deirdre said, are very innovative companies who are trying to unseat incumbent large enterprise companies, but we're here to help. And it's a fun process for us, and I'm sure it will be for you guys too.
Yeah, one of the things that we do with most of our clients from the outset is, you know, do you have your message? I always like to say, is your message concrete, and is everyone across all important functions aligned and saying the same value, speaking the same value to your customers and your different personas? And, you know, surprisingly, like most people say, well, yes, we've done an exercise in that. We think we have it right. It's probably more like Jell-O. So at EMA, we actually have a fairly rigorous framework where we get the right stakeholders in the room. We get violent agreement on these are the messages, and out of that exercise, not only do you crisp up and make it concise and compelling and intriguing to a potential buyer, but you're getting everybody aligned such that it spawns your content. It is so much easier to produce all of these content assets mapped to your buyer's journey when you have that, I call it the Bible or the foundation to draw from. And in fact, your keywords should naturally spawn out of that effort. And that's super important, especially when, you know, it's all things organic and search. Okay, so moving on, you probably figured out by now that, you know, attribution is equal parts systems, the data that brings you such that you can get some wisdom and intelligence, but it's also equal parts process and content strategy. So we take a phased approach. So to me, actually, the foundation, the most important piece is on the left there. I call it the engine. So, you know, your systems. You have Salesforce or some CRM. I think most people have Salesforce today. And do you have HubSpot? Do you have Marketo? And then, laterally, you can implement a sales loft or an outreach, which is really important for the sales team. So what is your database? Is your database representative of those ideal customers and those personas that you need to have conversations with? And then from an attribution perspective, there's we'll get into the guts of this in a second, but are you doing SEO and SEM? Do you have Google Analytics? Is your site optimized for search? Can people find you? You think you have a really cool, interesting name and product, but do you know what your keywords are? Do you know what your buyers are searching for? And like we said, the sales cycle processes and stages and definitions. Then you get into the programs. This is really the execution, and you have to do it lockstep with sales, making sure that the sales understand the value that marketing's putting out there. I've seen it all too often where the sales are on the front line. They're in the pressure cooker of trying to get deals over the line every Q and every half. And they're frustrated sometimes with marketing, who's sitting there churning out content and programs, and they're saying, well, that's not really resonating with this particular buyer. So that's why that ongoing continuous conversation is so important to get that feedback loop going. And, I always say live in their shoes for a day or a week or a Q and sit in on sales meetings and listen to what's actually happening in the market and what customers are saying and what their response is. That'll get you closer to figuring out conversion.
And I think especially taking those opportunities to speak with customers is one of the things I know that you love to do, and really teasing out those stories. As marketers, we're just natural storytellers, and that's the most important thing is finding ways to codify the message and then make sure that it gets out in every tweet, in every LinkedIn post, in every Google ad, so that as you're testing, which is what this is going to come down to, test, and identifying, because science is really the way out of this. So we're going to go back to some of the models here briefly, but once you've established what those models are and what your approach is going to be, and Deirdre and I have talked about when we think some different models are best, and so like for me as a marketer that does enterprise B2B sales, multi-touch, the full path is really the ideal. How many touches does it really take? We come up with 7 touches because that's what's born out of the data that we've been a part of. And, that first touch can just be, what's so nice about, Marketo and HubSpot is that, they will document sort of that first visit that came from a Google ad, but perhaps that person isn't inspired yet for a few weeks to go ahead and complete that form. But as long as you've got their code on your site, then it will backfill that data and augment that list so that when that conversion happens, that that they actually came in from a Google ad 2 weeks ago, and that is the program that gets attribution credit for the first touch. Then the second touch, and this all happens within seconds with Marketo, and that second touch gets applied because now it was a piece of content that inspired them to go ahead and download that, which might have been a piece of content that they saw later. And so there you've got 2 programs already, 2 touches, and then boom, sales guy reaches out, invites them to an event. They decide to come to that event, hear more about you in person. Boom, that third touch. So this is why getting the multi-touch, and for me, every touch out and all collected, that I can, as a revenue look-back period, we can really apply all of those touches, all of those efforts on the part of marketing and sales. And again, this is a group effort. All of those touches get that attribution. First touch, I think you like to talk about first touch.
Yeah. So I think you have to ask yourself, well, what is our business? What is our go-to-market strategy? What are we actually trying to figure out? Depends where you are in your growth and your journey and your maturity. So first touch for me, I think if I was, a SaaS organization, it's a sort of think of I'm selling a Zoom product. So it's not a lot of high touch, not a lot of FaceTime, not a lot of customization or complexity. You see the value, it's trial to buy. A lot of organizations start with a freemium model, then you want more features, functions, you pay by the month and so on. So it's classic SaaS go-to-market. In those situations, I think when you're starting out, you do want to understand, what is converting us at that first touch? What is getting that person over the line and converting them so that you can have a real dialogue and engage with them and have a human interaction so you can get that deal further along. But yes, multi-touch, whilst it's more data, a little bit more complex, it's longer drawn out. You're talking about like 9-12 month sales cycle. I think that's really important because one of the fallacies, and we'll get into this in a little bit, one of the fallacies is that a lot of times the salesperson says, well, that was the last touch, they became an SQL, that's my holy grail, that's my gold, and that's what happened, so that's all she wrote. Like, it was just that last white paper ebook that they downloaded. And that's a dangerous thing, especially for a marketeer, because we know and understand that there's many touches before that. So I think it's important to ask yourself, what's your business? What are you trying to achieve? So before you decide upon the model, and it should be a group effort, right? You probably even have your sales ops person in the room, your head of sales, potentially even your CFO. First things first, what actually answers are you trying to get out? So imagine and visualize that report that is going to be shared with the wider functional groups within your organization. So in finance and marketeers, you work very closely with finance because marketing generally spends the most amount of money, especially in startups. So if you have, a multi-million-dollar marketing budget, it's not going to take long before finance is coming knocking on your door and saying, what's actually happened to that investment? Did it work? Why are we doing more of that? I didn't see attribution to, a big, target account deal come over the line because of what marketing did. So they're going to ask you, what's that ROI? And involving finance at the outset of this journey of how do we attribute is super important because they have to understand how many touches and what type of touches it takes to get that deal in play. And then, Joe, you've worked with product engineering teams as well. What do they care about?
Yeah, so product is really interested in the messaging side of the house, and so that's why it's so critical that we track and distribute what are the keywords that people are searching on and what are the content pieces that people are searching on. It's really interesting for us with the insights that are available to some of the tools that we can see, looking at even, where people are looking at within your landing page, within your website, that these are the important features that are consistently inspiring a click. And so getting that feedback back to sales and to product is so important so that they're producing the right feature set as the product iterates. And there are obviously, for some of our SaaS customers, there's data within the product, which is super critical, and getting our systems working together to get that feedback loop is super important so that we know, oh, that's a feature that we need to push now. And so this is all of these conversations and continuing to nurture this sort of conversation within the companies that you work for and with it's the fun part of marketing, I think. So
yeah, I think product as well, they're laser focused on the next release. So what are the differentiating features they're going to bring out in the next release? So let's say you did a big campaign around a new product launch, multi-vehicles, multi-content assets. So getting that looped back into them, that team is super important. So this is I sort of touched on this point earlier, and it's around the whole patience part. And, most startups that are VC backed, it's critical that, you start to see early wins to prove it out. And then, of course, go back out and get your next round of funding so you can scale and post-growth phase. So preconceived ideas are generally wrong. And we will share a little bit of a case study here because I've seen it again and again myself. The important thing is, make sure, I like this image, don't just stand there, do something about it. So, yes, you've got to rely on the data. The data will reveal all. There is I think our marketeer's dream is that Marketo was born a few years back, and it's like finally now we have the data and metrics to prove out what's really happening. And I've been in many meetings, in many situations where you're sitting around the room and you're like, it's what happened with the last opportunity, what happened at the last meeting. It's classic. Maybe your head of sales is there, and we went to an event and we met such and such a big client at such and such an event, and sales ran with it, and we closed the deal, and that's all we need to do. So now we need to do more conferences and more events. And marketing loves conference events. The sales love it because it's press the flesh, face time. You sort of almost guilt the person who's following up with you. But, that's not the only vehicle. There are many, many other vehicles that you have to use and different assets. So I think the data will reveal, and you have to rely on that. Do you want to say anything more there, Joe, on that point?
No, I just think it's just super critical to be able to really hone in on all of the both digital and I love live events. I do, but it's also people won't be inspired to perhaps interact with you if they don't know who you are, and because we do work with so many tiny companies that it's important to get out those, especially using ABM tactics and strategies. I worked with demand-based for a time on an ABM strategy with one of our clients, and honestly, it was just so interesting that you were able to hone in on the exact buyer and only serve up digital ads to those buyers and inspire them. And so, and then being able to attribute those clicks is super important.
So this is I think it's an interesting story. So here's a client case study. We're anonymizing this to, protect them. But so well-funded startup, tier one investors, very seasoned team, great technology, lots of IP, huge ROI, selling to enterprises. So the EMA team worked with the customer some months back and augmented their Salesforce data, did some cleanup, and really hashed out exactly what their ICP and buyer personas is, and then did a bunch of outbound execution campaigns, including Bright Talk Summit. And the target buyer was, an IT buyer, decision maker. It's in the database, data-centric area, functional area. So we started, and the attribution told us something. So, Joe, can you share with us some of the learnings because of attribution?
Yeah, and so the attribution, first of all, told us that, just to recap this, we later went back and did the personas, because they told us when we joined them, no, we have this, and so, but the data told us otherwise. So the data told us that the ideal customer that they had identified before we came on board was different, and so because the people that were actually clicking on the ads that we submitted, that we were targeting based on their learnings, their insight, their hypothesis. Mm-hmm. And all of this is a science experiment. So they hypothesized that they were going to go after a low-level person. The data came back and said, actually, the low-level person is not your target buyer. Then we went back and they said this is the right message to go out with, and the data came back and said, no, this is actually not what you should be going after. So, we were informed by the data that we should go after C-level. Mm-hmm. And we were informed by the data that we should go after a more business value message. And we were informed by the data that those business value messages needed to be backed up with proof points and ROI and TCO clickable assets that those buyer personas were hungry for. And so we helped them reconcile that, change the message, and since then up into the right for them as both a client and as an organization. So we're super proud of their success and
their learnings
their learnings. Yeah, I mean, but we would not have known that had we not been very fastidious about the way that we were tracking every program and every touch. And so, here you go.
Yeah, so we touched on this earlier, talking about touches. So, figure out the what does the report look like? What answers are you trying to get? And when this little sort of like from left to right here, just Joe and I felt like this is sort of a level set before we get into UTM codes, because UTM codes will be your friend, drilling down a little bit more. So just before we get into that, so you on the far left, you want to actually from a report perspective in Salesforce, you want to attribute, was this marketing driven and sourced, was it sales driven and sourced, or was it partners? And a lot of organizations are in the hybrid and working closely with partners more and more now. Then think about like what type of campaign this is, and you aggregate on, all your conferences, all your SEM efforts. These are examples. You go down the list of all the different marketing mix that you have. I call it the marketing mix. And then what you have to decide, what is the definition of success for that particular campaign type. So for a particular conference that you may be spending 30, 40, 50 grand on, it's the number of A leads scanned at the booth. You decide what will be the measure of success there, and then you will track that through all your attribution efforts in the campaign module of Salesforce, okay? And then so on, you can read for yourself there in terms of what your definition of success is for that. Now, the UTM codes are, that is the method to capturing all of that data and tracking it accordingly. One of the best practices that EMA, and I'll give full credit goes to Joe on this, is because, yes, those UTM codes are shared by all members of the team. Everybody should know them. It's in your Marketo system. It's on all those landing pages. It's shared if you have an SEO, SEM agency, and so on. They are using the same codes. Your partners that are promoting those events are using the codes, so you know exactly where the touch was and how to attribute it. But the best way to manage all these codes is,
obviously, with the systems, so the HubSpots and the Marketos, we couldn't do any of this without them. On top of a standard system, there are additional plugins that some of our partners have created for WordPress and other instances that can help you go ahead and it'll track not just that first touch, but it'll make sure that the attribution code, your UTM parameters are preserved for the entire visit on the site. Because a lot of times people might click an ad, come in, but then they don't immediately interact. But throughout that entire session, adding just a little bit of JavaScript can maintain that data so that when they finally, before they leave the session, they might have clicked around, gone to several pages, but it'll maintain that code and ensure that your program does get the attribution. So make sure that your smart web dev team has that in place and can make sure that they're helping you maintain that. And then it's important for us, we have a large integrated marketing organization, and there are so many teams. So, you have to make sure that the folks that are sharing things on social, your whole social team has to be armed and has to accept, like, yes, you have to go and maintain all of UTM codes in a way that is available. And me as a roving CMO, I need to be able to have a single view, and so I love Google Sheets for this.
Or Excel.
Yeah. But I love
a master doc.
Yeah, and I love that everybody can come in and see it and then just grab and go. And we also especially do grab and go for our sales teams. We want to make sure that whenever a new asset is created at any of the companies that we work with, that those sales reps will get credit for sharing that. And so I have grab and go as one of my UTM sort of parameters. So it'll be, campaign source will be sales, but then it'll be part of grab and go content as well as the asset type and name. So it's just, for our practice, what we're trying to do is create this is daily yoga,
right?
of maintaining good, solid naming conventions type so that you can readily see what happens. And then just make sure you're collecting this on the back end. You've got your hidden fields in your Marketo form, and then you've got your instant attribution campaigns that are running in the background. So
Yeah, and just the grab and go, that's sort of a little, naming convention Joe's using. So what we like to do is, the marketing cannot sit in their ivory tower and be plugging away at this. So sharing bit.ly with your sales team. So literally think of like the end of the week or on a weekly basis, you're sending out some communication to the broader sales team and saying, here's all the things and the programs and the campaigns that are running. Oh, and by the way, here's the things that you can share with if you're in Sales Loft or whatever your tool of choice, or you're just sharing it with directly an email, so that we can track what the sales team is doing as well as they proliferate all of that rich, juicy content assets that you've spent time and energy creating. The bit.ly thing is really important because, Joe, do you want to just add a point on that it preserves that as it propagates?
Yeah, what's really fun about bit.ly, and I think all of these other web shortening link places do it now too, but if you make one for each of your clients, your customers, your marketing, your sales team, whatever, that you can just get a single pane of glass for that client about how that UTM, how that bit.ly has performed. And it's not just, what you can see, what eventually comes back to your site, which will be another indicator, but it's also, because there are some things that you share that don't necessarily come back to your site, but you'll be able to see how that bit.ly gets shared broadly. And it's definitely another bit of data, and we love data, that's all.
Yeah, so this is the visualization of an example of a report that you would output from all of the things. This is bringing all of this together. This is, exactly what the original source type was, converting campaign, the landing page, the medium, the source, and even the terms for all of the SEO stuff. So, we work with clients to figure this out. This is just an example that we pulled from, obviously we've anonymized the content here. So just, we're rounding the corner here, and we're soon finishing up, and we want to give time for any questions. So, getting attribution right from the get-go is super important. We talked about the models, we talked about the look back. So, sometimes you're in an organization where you don't have those deals and enough critical mass of data and, deals over the line to figure out, well, what actually works. So it's tracing back the path that buyer took on their journey and all the different touches. So, Joe, do you want to just talk about, this is the first recreated, these milestone processy events that you're tracking before close one?
Yeah, and so what I'll sometimes do, because some of our clients want, an ROI on what has happened so far this year, and so I can go back to an individual. I'll go to a sales accepted lead, and I'll peanut butter spread. I'll do 30%, 30%, 30% across that, knowing that the last 10% will be attributed to sales, but just taking, what the 10% opportunity is open there and just saying, I'm going to do that now, even though there's probably another 6 months left in the sales cycle, but at least we'll get some information now, indicators exactly now, and then help us justify those expenses. So that's basically what you're doing. You're just taking what your end game revenue is, and when that data does finally get over the line, you get to close one, then you can redo this report. But there's always touch points along the way where we think that we've made traction, that obviously sales is working this, it's gotten into the top of the funnel, and they have line of sight to a closed deal. Then let's just take that data and help our CMOs go ahead. And same thing with this full attribution. And this is when you get there, and this is just indicating, sales is always getting some credit. So let's just never forget about them. You're going to take all your budget, and then you're going to disperse it, but you're always going to give credit to sales for getting it the last part over the line. So never take all the money. But this is a team effort, and showing these types of slides to sales is also showing them that you value their expertise and input, and that this is really a team effort. So
yeah, and this is the multi-touch, and knowing was it 5 touches, was it 7, was it 4, what things, what assets and what campaigns helped get that conversion as the customer goes through that buying cycle. So just to round out, and then we will take some questions, this is a sort of a best practices and a timeline, and I think it's really a summary of some of the topics we covered today. So a couple of things, like when you're small and you think attribution is for more mature organizations, don't think that way, because you have to start capturing all of that data and attribution early on, so that you have that indicators of what's working and what's not, right? Especially if you're in the longer sales cycles. So do you have a tech stack, the engine I talked about, that buyer journey and all those assets mapped to the stages? That looks a bit scary for some people. It's like, oh my God, how am I going to produce the podcasts and the blogs and the ebooks and the events, and my budget doesn't even allow. So you don't have to do an exhaustive, you can pick a few per stage. Don't do it all on the far left in the early part of the journey, but sort of pick a few assets that you think are going to be the best for your buyer audience, and don't feel overwhelmed by it. And combination of digital and physical is always good. And some of our clients are just doing organic. They're not doing any paid. It's a little too expensive for them right now. So you have to pick and choose what those best channels are for you. Make sure you have your sales cycle processes. And if you don't know what those buyer journey stages are, you have to start somewhere. So get it written down and agree with the go-to-market team on that. And what is the model that you're going to pick? Is it the first or last, or multi-touch? We advocate multi-touch, especially when you're in those complex sales cycles. And then UTM codes are your friend. Update, keep a master sheet, share with everybody, keep it consistent, clean, conventional naming, and then start to build those reports and test. Give it time, be patient, and then adjust. So based on that case study we shared with you, don't assume, don't rely on your hunches. So let's see if we have any questions, Joe.
Oh, we want to say thanks, everybody. You answered my question. Did you hear us?
Yeah.
We're glad you can hear us.
The sound is good.
Yeah.
How important is consistency in UTM, and what's the best way to make sure there's no mistakes? I think, looking back at the deciding what your codes are and keeping that master sheet and making it shareable, and anybody who's outside the four walls for your organization, making sure that they follow. That's one of the tips we have.
Yeah, and one of our best practice that saves us quite often is that our team always swim together. So we have, if you're working a client and you're doing social, you have a buddy, and then you guys test each other's links and bit.lys, and you test all the way through to a completed form. And so that's why I like to make that public, and I do go and review that sheet often. And I've seen things where, my ampersand got removed. I need that. So then I go back and make sure that that's all happening. That's why we, so somebody asked us, what about sales that scrape your UTM parameters? Well, we love creativity on their part.
Yeah.
About the site. That's a challenge, and I think as the technologies are changing, I think that there'll be more ways for us to correct that over time. So, I've leaned heavily on technology, and so I'm sure that we'll come up with newer and better ways to do that.
Yeah, somebody's asking if the slides are available. Yes, we'll make those available, no problem. Attribution platforms we recommend.
I have using data.
Yeah, so Joe will answer that one in a minute. There's a question before we get to that one. Do you think multi-touch attribution should be equally weighted, or do you recommend separate weighting for bottom, middle, and top of funnel touches? I think that the percentage attribution that you give to those touches, I think, is totally fine. There's another model. It's called the decay model. So in that look back, so let's say, your your deal closed, and now you're looking back and you apply a heavier weighting to that last touch, and then it decays over time. So a smaller percentage is first, and then middle will be a higher percentage, and then so on. Because the idea is that, you know, the more engaged they are and the closer they are to buying, the heavier the attribution. I think it also comes back to the question of what's your definition of success based on what that campaign type is. So, for example, in the conferences example I used, you know, you might be spending a lot more on conferences as opposed to search or Twitter ad campaign, for example.
Right, but if their engagement at that conference was low and they didn't really have success, so they were a booth visitor but did not see a demo or did not have a meeting, and so they didn't get that higher level of engagement there, you might actually just put them as a lower attribution amount for that particular lead. Mm-hmm. And then again, as they get closer to that item that caused the last attribution, the last touch before opportunity is created, then that can get the higher, just like you said. So that's my sort of practice, is I have a hybrid.
Yeah. Between what we do with our clients is we tend to peanut butter spread it at the outset, and then when you get more mature and, you know, a bigger organization we have enterprise clients and then we have mid-market clients, so you can do different attribution depending on the ultimate deal size that closes.
Yeah. And
do you want to talk about the tech?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of tech out there. I have used the question is, what attribution platforms do you recommend? Have you used Lean Data or any other platforms that sync to Salesforce? I have used Lean Data. I have used Visible, and I think they're all good. I mean, when I started in marketing, there were about, 150 sort of, tech companies, and now there's 6,000. And I'm probably wrong, and maybe there's 8,000. More time passed, there's another 1,000. I think there's a lot of help. There's a lot of burden on the marketer today. I know we all carry a heavy weight, and I would just figure out what's best for your. Go into these conversations with reporting in mind. What is important to you, and what is important to the business? What do they need to see? But I've had good experience with those two.
I rely on Marketo at Salesforce and then Google Analytics.
Yeah.
Those are the predominant ones.
Yeah.
And of course, some clients have HubSpot.
Yeah.
Our Marketo is more robust.
Yeah.
For sure.
And we want to give a mad shout out today to Bright Talk for hosting this webinar. We really enjoyed it. That is one of the tools that we often recommend to our clients. So we want to thank everybody for your attendance and your great questions.
And we will share replies with you, and check us out on expertmarketingadvisors.com. Give us a call, send us an email. You'll find Joe and myself on LinkedIn. Our host today, Olivia, will share that at the end. And we appreciate your engagement level throughout. And hopefully this was useful and interesting. And I think we're scratching the surface on the whole attribution topic, but hopefully give you some guideposts and best practices. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.